26 people were killed in the latest mass shooting in Texas. Why are we continuing to see this kind of violence? And can these kinds of attacks be stopped? Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick will join us. And later, Congress is threatening to kill the adoption tax credit in their new reform bill. New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith, author of that tax credit, thinks it's a bad idea. We'll discuss. And finally, is the racial divide in the U.S. widening? What can the church do to help promote racial healing? Bishop Edward Braxton of Belleville, Illinois, will share his thoughts. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, Congressman Chris Smith, and Bishop Edward Braxton are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Or email me at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Hope for Democrats, finally. After a year of disappointments, election victories across the country on Tuesday are giving the Democrat Party momentum going into the 2018 elections. Topping the list, Democrats won big in Virginia as Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam defeated longtime GOP insider Ed Gillespie in the race for governor. Northam rode a wave of strong anti-Trump sentiment that turned the Democratic base out in record numbers. Trump suggested in a tweet that Gillespie lost because he did not embrace Trump or his agenda during the campaign. In fact, Gillespie refused to be seen with the president and was late in pushing issues central to Trump's movement. It should also be pointed out the president lost Virginia in the presidential race. Also on Tuesday, wins in the gubernatorial race in New Jersey and in Washington state in the Senate. That gives Democrats full control of those respective state governments. Earlier this week, Pope Francis announced the appointment of two lay women to leadership positions in the Roman Curia. Dr. Gabriella Gambino, an expert on bioethics, and Dr. Linda Gissoni, a canon lawyer, were appointed undersecretaries in the Vatican Office of Laity, Family, and Life. The prefect of that dicastery, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, has said that he, like Pope Francis, is a firm believer that the future of the Church depends on the laity. The two women become the highest or third highest ranking officials in the department, and their appointments are seen as evidence of the Pope's determination to promote women within the Church's leadership. And yes, big change and small continues at the Vatican. Pope Francis has announced that he is banning the sale of tax-free cigarettes inside the Vatican. In doing so, it's giving up one of the biggest money makers for the Church, at least the Holy See. Cigarettes bring in an estimated 10 million euros annually, second only to its sale of gasoline. According to the press office, Francis made the decision because, quote, the Holy See cannot contribute to any activity that clearly damages the health of people. An estimated 40,000 people have access to Vatican shops, including employees, retirees, residents, accredited diplomats, and members of religious congregations. Thou shalt not smoke. And in a fiery rebuke on Wednesday, Pope Francis told the Vatican faithful to pay attention during Mass and stop taking pictures of him. The Holy Father said it's a bad thing that so many spend Mass talking to others or looking at their phone or even taking pictures during papal liturgies. These things, he said, are distractions that take focus away from the heart of the Church, the Eucharist. As far as taking pictures with your mobile devices, he noted, the priest says we lift up our hearts. He does not say we lift up our phones to take photographs. And during the 2005 conclave, Francis says he urged fellow cardinals to back the election of Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger as Pope. This revelation comes in a new book-length interview of the Pope by an Argentinian journalist. According to other reports, during the 2005 conclave, then Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio had strong support from reform-minded cardinals and finished second in the balloting. According to Francis, he asked his fellow cardinals to give their support to Ratzinger, saying that at that moment in history, the only man with the stature, the wisdom, and the necessary experience to be elected was Ratzinger. He said he also felt that the time was not yet right for a Latin American pope. And as the late Pope John Paul I was declared venerable by Pope Francis on Thursday, thus advancing his cause for sainthood, a new book reveals that the late Pope, who served just 33 days in 1978, did indeed die of a heart attack. The book, Papa Luciani, Chronicle of a Death, aims to put to rest numerous conspiracy theories of foul play and murder surrounding the death of the smiling Pope. The book presents evidence, including previously undisclosed medical reports from the Vatican archives, confirming original reports that the late pontiff most likely died of a heart attack. On the canonization front, the Vatican is also examining two purported miracles attributed to the late Pope's intercession. And this past weekend, a crowd of well over 10,000 gathered in India for the beatification ceremony of that country's first female martyr, Sister Rani Maria, a Franciscan Clarist nun. She was murdered in 1995 by an assassin hired by local Hindu landlords who resented her work among the poor. Sister Rani Maria encouraged workers to demand fair wages and taught them to avoid exorbitant interest rates on loans. The ceremony was presided over by the head of the Congregation for the Cause of Saints, Cardinal Angelo Amato, and sitting in the front row was her assassin. Though repentant and despite receiving forgiveness by Sister Rani's family, the assassin said he felt a weight of such a terrible crime, and he expressed happiness that the nun has been recognized as a martyr. What a story. And this sounds like a match made in heaven. Fashion and Catholicism will be the theme of the 2018 Met Gala in New York this spring. Heavenly Bodies, Fashion, and the Catholic Imagination will be presented by the Costume Institute. The exhibit hopes to create a dialogue between fashion and the masterworks of religious art. The upcoming show will be presented at the Anna Wintour Costume Center and the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Medieval Galleries and the Cloisters uptown. Pieces will include vestments on loan from the Sistine Chapel sacristy, as well as ensembles by designers like Versace, Chanel, and a recent controversial collection by John Galliano featuring models wearing papal mitres and swinging incense down red-carpeted runways. I'll bet Bill Donahue already has his tickets. Bill would look good in Versace, I think. When we return, how to deal with the evil unleashed by the Texas shooter in a church. We'll tell you how the community is coping there and what might be done to stop the next tragedy. Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, joins us when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
I'm no hero. I am not. I think my God, my Lord, protected me and gave me the skills to do what needed to be done. And I just wish I could have gotten there faster.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was Stephen Williford, the hero who grabbed his own AR-15 to take down the gunman in Sutherland Springs, Texas. He heard gunfire at the First Baptist Church near his home and took action. 26 people were killed, more than a dozen wounded in the attack. How does a community recover from a tragedy like this? And what can be done to prevent these kinds of attacks from happening in the future? Dan Patrick, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, joins me now from Houston. Thank you for being with us, Lieutenant Governor Patrick.
Yes, Raymond, good to be with you. Thank
Dan,
you.
You spent some time with the man we just heard from, Stephen Williford, this week. What did he say to you? What moved him to action? And, I mean, the man had bare feet. He grabbed his gun. He ran when he heard the gunfire in the church. What moves someone like that to action?
Well, we did spend a lot of time together a few days ago, probably an hour. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he asked me to share with anyone that I talked with was to let them know he's a Christian first and a victim. He does not feel like a hero, Raymond. He feels as a victim, and he's grappling with that. He said to me, I was going to the hospital after we met and to visit some of the victims, and he said, I'd like to go, but I can't because everyone wants to hail me as a hero, and I'm struggling with this loss. These are my community friends. These are people I knew, and I'm suffering. He does feel that God gave him a steady hand and calmness in that moment. He's overcome a lot in his life. He realizes he's a survivor, and he was there at that moment. We don't know how many lives he potentially saved because had he not shot the killer, that shooter would have gone on maybe to have a shootout with police, go to another church. They drove by another church in the chase. So all we know is he was called at the right time there to take out an evil person who went pew by pew slaughtering people who were there simply to pray on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, one of the survivors in the Washington Post the other day said she was consoling a dying fellow parishioner, and this guy was walking down the aisle with the AK shooting people again to make sure they were dead, and it was only the shots from Mr. Williford into the church that stopped him, drew his attention, and then the shooter left. So at least one life, probably multiples in that church he saved, to speak of nothing of the others who were, who he might have encountered outside. I want to move on to the other victims you spoke to at the hospital. I know you spent some time with them. How are they coping with this? How do they process this, particularly as people of faith? There are some looking in who would say, look, these people are in deep prayer. They're at Sunday worshiping God, and they've been permitted to die, and they somehow look to God and say, He allowed this to happen. What are they telling you, and what would you say?
Well, the first thing, I was in the hospital within 48 hours of the shooting, and the thing, to be honest with you, Raymond, I had not thought through. I just wanted to be with them. My pastor told me a long time ago that when you go to visit people, whether it's at a funeral service or somewhere in the hospital, just being there. You don't have to say a lot, just being there, letting them know you care. And so I try not to say too much, but I had not thought through the fact that these people have been in surgery and under anesthesia. They haven't had the televisions on in the room, so the families don't have to see the reports and those who are in the hospital. So they weren't aware really of totally what had happened. And so the one woman I visited, and she asked to keep anonymous, but she told me I could tell the story. I mean, she lost her husband, and her granddaughter was upstairs in critical condition. And she said, I lost 80% of my friends that day and my family members. She said, but I know that a whole family went to heaven together, And her faith was so strong, and everyone I met, their faith is so strong. And then I went to another room, and I was really the first person the hospital said that this particular person had talked to, because she had just been moved to a regular room, and knelt down next to her bed, and she looked at me and she said, did they all die? And I really didn't know what to say at that point. And I said, no, but some did. And I remembered what the First Lady had said to me. I said, but a family from your church went to heaven together. This is just an immense tragedy, beyond anyone's belief. When you have one family that loses 8 members, and multiple families lost multiple members, when you have children shot babies multiple times. I visited a 5-year-old who was asleep when I was in the room, but I visited with his mom. And what we've seen through this, Raymond, is the most incredible witness for Jesus Christ that I have ever seen in such a horrendous moment. This town is unified together. A pastor shared this with me, and I asked if I could share it, and he said yes. And he said, Jesus came to us with one lone star bright in the sky. And now the Lone Star State is standing on the faith of his promise of being there for us and knowing that we will be with him in heaven as believers and our families will be together again. Powerful statement.
Lieutenant Governor Patrick, I want to get into something we're hearing here in Washington, D.C., and really in certain media parlors. Media establishment figures as well as politicians casting aspersions rather, media and political types, casting aspersions on people of faith and prayer in particular. Listen to this.
Thoughts and prayers didn't stop a troubled person from buying assault-grade weapons that took the lives of 26 people.
Thoughts and prayers are not going to stop the next mass shooting.
Lieutenant Governor Patrick, your thoughts on the answer here. They're setting this up as being a contest between faith and political action. Your thoughts on this?
Well, as a Christian first, before I'm an elected official or anything else, I'm a Christian first in my life, and I have to pray for others who don't understand the power of prayer. The Bible tells us we have to pray for our opponents, our enemies, and not that all of these people are our enemies, but many of these people in mainstream media, and I'll just say this clearly, in society in general, just aren't where you are and I am and your audience is in our faith, and they don't understand. They don't understand, as the one family member who lost 8 family members said, it is not up for us to understand God, but to trust God. Non-believers just aren't at that point in their life, and so they scoff at prayer. They mock those of us who are believers, whether you're a Jew, you're a Muslim, you're a Christian, a Catholic, Protestant, it doesn't matter. People of faith are mocked all over the world today, and as Christians, we are in danger all over the world today. Look, this clearly appears to be right now an early information, obviously a domestic issue, but this was an evil person who hated Christians. He didn't just look for his mother-in-law, who it appears that she went to that church. She was not there that morning.
Right.
But he killed everyone in that church. He was angry at God. And the only thing that will get us through this is the love of Jesus Christ. Legislation, all of those things will be reviewed at another time and looked at. But prayer, we as believers know, that is what sustained us. Our belief in Jesus Christ and his promise of the Gospels. That's what gets us through times like this.
Dan,
nothing else can.
You just mentioned something there, and I want to pick up on it.
And I'm sorry, many others don't know that.
We're hearing little of the motivation of the shooter. You said there that you believe beyond the domestic tension that might have been in the home, it was certainly his mother-in-law that drew him to the church, for that to be his target, that he was angry with God. Is that what law enforcement is leading you to believe?
No, that's just Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor, speaking. I'm not saying that, look, they're still working through all the motives. I'm saying that what I see in this country today, I post scripture on my Facebook page every Sunday. I've done it for years. And in the last few years, even simple scripture is mocked. I know, and you all know this who work on this network. You know the haters are out there. There are people angry for many reasons. There's this mocking of believers and this violence, and I think social media plays into this. It allows people to voice their angry thoughts, and I hope social media did not play a part in this. This person was obviously troubled for a long time, but this was an act of evil. And the reason I believe, and I said it earlier the first day, I said, when you see someone go into a church, pew by pew, and gun people down, who have done nothing to him, what is the commonality between them? They are Christians. They were in church praying. He killed them, and that says to me that this was someone who had whatever the family issues are, and all of that will play out in time, but this was a person who didn't go in there to target one person.
Right.
He went in there to target believers. It's very clear.
I need to ask you this just before I run out of time. What should be the practical solution? I want to put this up. This is your Attorney General in Texas, Ken Paxton. He says, so we need people in churches, either professional security or at least arming some of the parishioners and the congregation so that they can respond when something like this happens again. Do you support that idea? And what do you make of the Democrats on Capitol Hill putting forward a bill that would ban so-called assault weapons?
Well, thank goodness Steve Willisford had an assault weapon. He may have been outgunned if he had a much smaller weapon. The guns aren't the issue, it's the evil people that have them. We passed a law this session, Raymond, this very session we just wrapped up in June, that says that anyone who has a concealed carry, and you have to be over 21 and pass a background check and no criminal issues. In fact, we did not qualify this killer for concealed carry. We turned him down because he tried to get one. So if you pass the background check, we passed a law that you can serve as a security officer in a church. But we have many churches already who have off-duty police officers, retired police officers, and in Texas, if you have a concealed carry and the church allows it, you can carry a weapon. Where we see massacres like this, we see gun-free zones. And we need, in this day and time, to understand that Jesus Christ protects us for eternity, but while we are here on earth to protect us from evil, besides God protecting us, we have to do the simple and common sense things to protect our families wherever we are.
Your thoughts on that Democratic proposal to ban assault weapons? Would you support that?
No, I don't support it. Again, Stephen grabbed his assault weapon and took down this killer. And the weapon is not the issue. You could say the thing about many things. Should we ban cars because drunk drivers kill people? Should we ban all knives because people are stabbed? It's the people that get behind the wheel drunk that are responsible. It's the people who take that knife and stab someone who are responsible. It's the person who takes that gun and kills innocent people who's responsible. We won't be safer. It will be the bad people, the evil people, who will have more gun-free zones to attack others. Raymond, this is, I've been, as lieutenant governor and as a senator and just, living my life, I've seen a lot of tragedies in life. We've just come through a terrible hurricane here where hundreds of thousands of people have lost everything and almost 100 people lost their lives. This is such an unspeakable tragedy that the only thing that will heal this community will be Jesus Christ and their faith, and they will be healed. This will be with them forever. But their strength and their courage is beyond anything I've seen.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, thank you so much for being here and for your insights. Our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas, and with all of you. Thanks for being here. When we return, will the GOP tax reform plan make it through Congress by the end of the year? And should the adoption tax credit remain in the code? New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith will tell us when the world over continues. Stay right there.
Today, we stand on the doorstep of delivering the most sweeping tax overhaul in more than 30 years. It's about making America's economy stronger than ever by delivering more jobs, fairer taxes, and bigger paychecks across this nation.
In 2003, Republicans offered a tax cut of an additional $1 trillion, and in 2005, they offered a repatriation tax holiday. Each time, they promised job growth. However, they took us to the casino each time without a win. So why do we think that we'll have a win with this proposal?
Welcome back to The World Over. That was the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Republican Congressman Kevin Brady, and ranking member of that committee, Democrat Richard Neal, talking tax reform earlier this week. As the parties decide what stays in the plan and what goes, there's a tax credit in jeopardy of being eliminated. And this could hurt families, the adoption tax credit. Joining me now is the author of that credit, New Jersey Congressman and friend of the program, Congressman Chris Smith, joining us from the Capitol. Congressman, thank you for being there. I want to start right in. You introduced
Raymond, great to be on with you.
You introduced a $5,000 refundable adoption credit in Congress in 1990. Then it was reintroduced in the following years. It eventually became law with bipartisan support. Why are your colleagues in the House suggesting its repeal?
Well, I think they're making a mistake, but it's a mistake that's on the road towards being rectified. Chairman Brady now has an amendment that would restore the adoption tax credit, which was a Republican idea. I mean, I started in 1989, introduced it in 1990. It became part of the Contract for America, and Newt Gingrich was very much a part of that, as well as the rest of the leadership. It was bipartisan, but we took the lead on it. The Democrats did not mark that up and bring it to the floor when they had control of the House. And then Jim DeMint doubled it to $10,000, and now it's about $13,400. And it makes all the difference in the world for people who are trying, particularly middle-income people, to put together a plan to adopt a child, the lawyers' fees and all of that, or children. And it also is a rescue for those who are dealing with overseas adoptions, which increasingly people are doing.
Right. Congressman Smith, about 135,000 children are adopted in the United States each year. So that credit ends up being a drop in the bucket. But Speaker Ryan argues that the tax credit goes predominantly to higher income individuals and won't affect middle or lower earning families. Your thoughts?
Well, again, it's in the process of being taken out of the bill, which is good. But there's other steps in this legislation, in the Senate, of course, on the House floor. But it begins to phase out at about $200,000 for both husband and wife, and is out completely by about $250,000. So many of those who are taking advantage of this are doing it who are, middle income and upper middle income. And again, it's all about that upfront, non-refundable costs, the lawyer fees and everything else. And overseas, it could be $30,000 or $40,000. To bring that child home. So why not have their backs? And I do think we're going to turn this around, and we're in the process of doing it right now.
Some of the data I've read suggests that 60% of the families who do adopt children are actually from those lower and middle income brackets. So it actually might help lower and middle income folks.
Oh, it definitely will. And I would add to that, when I originally introduced the bill, it was a refundable credit so that people, even lower on the tiers of the economic ladder, would have the ability to put together an adoption plan so that they could bring children or a child into their loving home.
Congressman Smith, in a recent interview, you said that you would vote no to the GOP tax overhaul if that adoption tax credit were dropped. Is that still standing? I mean, is that your position still?
Oh, without a doubt. But again, we're in the process of having it taken out.
Okay.
Chairman Brady has what we call a manager's amendment that gets rid of the repeal.
Okay.
So that's a great step forward. But frankly, there were some other things wrong with it, including state and local taxes, which would be highly hurtful to states like my own in New Jersey. So I will vote no. And I'm a believer in tax cuts. People are overtaxed. I voted for the Reagan tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts.
Okay.
They have a stimulative impact. More money goes into people's pockets where it belongs. It is very hard to be in this position because I do believe that we need tax reform and a significant tax cut. But we got to get it right.
Congressman, the Senate is marking up its version of the tax reform. Have the elections this week and the Democratic victories hastened or strengthened the will among Republicans to get something done?
There's no doubt we need tax reform and we need to get this done, but it has to be done right. I would say, I look at my district, Raymond. Hillary Clinton got 42% in my district. Our gubernatorial candidate, Kim Guadagno, got 42% in my district. That's almost identical. I mean, it's a little percentage, 42 and change. I see no change from one year to the next from what Trump got in my district and what Kim Guadagno, our lieutenant governor, got. So, that's a good bellwether. I have a lot of ticket splitters in my district, and yet the outcomes were almost identical from a year ago. Meanwhile, I took my district with 65% of the vote.
Let's talk about this tax plan particularly. I know both President Trump and Speaker Ryan have said, look, this is for the middle class. But 90% of taxpayers are in the upper income area of the tax code. So why are they getting an increase? This seems like a break from the Reagan tax cuts that you voted for.
Well, Raymond, Bush especially, but previous tax cuts that we've done under Reagan and then especially under Bush and Bush, they pushed more people out of the obligation to pay federal income taxes. So the threshold when taxes have to be paid kept going up higher and higher and higher as millions of people no longer had a federal income tax liability. They had other tax liabilities, but not that one. So a lot of lower income people are already, and I think it's a good thing, excluded from having to pay because they're at least able to afford it.
So then you support this idea. I mean, you see, it seemed the governing philosophy behind the Reagan cuts was that you give everybody a tax cut across the board, and those upper income earners who are the drivers of industry and investment, with that cut, you get reinvestment and more jobs. It seems the Republicans have abandoned that philosophy, right?
Well, I hope not, because I do believe we need to lower the rates. Bracket creep has hurt a lot of people who are paying more than they should. The alternative minimum tax was supposed to be for the very rich. Well, that's no longer the case. A lot of people are caught in that one. And again, our corporate tax at 35% or so, we ought to lower that. Maybe 20 is not the ideal number, but we need to lower it to help our corporations create jobs. It's all about job creation and small business, which is the engine of job creation, giving them a tax cut. And I come from a small business background, just incentivizes to hire more people, grow your business rather than just write another check to Uncle Sam.
Congressman, I want to talk about a few other issues before we run out of time. You have endorsed something called the Conscience Protection Act. Now, this touches on medical workers who are asked to take part in abortions. I thought the federal government already allowed them to not take part in those abortions if they feel morally compelled to do otherwise. Why do we need this new act?
Well, Raymond, great question. We have three major conscience protections laws. The most recent and the best of all, in a sense, is the Weldon Amendment, named after Dave Weldon of Florida. The problem with that law, though, which provides that protection, it doesn't have a right of private action. So all over the country, we have hospital personnel being coerced into performing abortions who then have to take the risk of saying no to their higher-ups. So we had 3 women who were nurses who were told to participate. And one of those ladies who was told at Mount Sinai to participate in a 22-week gestational baby dismemberment, and she had to piece together the parts of that baby. She still has nightmares. Kathy DeCarlo just is, I mean, it broke her. And she was under threat of losing her job, conflicted, and all of that, and now a tremendous amount of hurt. She went to court, and she was told, you have no right of private action. You have no standing, even though you're the aggrieved party. This new bill, the mainstay, the linchpin, is to provide that private right of action. In California, Governor Jerry Brown, who's at the Vatican, walking around with the cardinals and doing with Sanchez Serrando and others, he has imposed on the Catholic Church and all faith-based entities in California that they have to provide abortion on demand in their insurance policies, which is not found in New Jersey, it's not found in most states, but it is found in California, it's found in Oregon and New York. So this would give the church the ability to fight back and say, we want no part, no complicity in dismembering and killing unborn children. Governor Brown, shame on you. How dare you do this?
Before I let you go, Congressman, tell me about this Congo hearing that you had today. People don't realize what's happening in that country.
Raymond, I've been to the DR Congo in the past. It's where some 4 million people died from bloodshed. It's a country about 100 million, the size, 2/3 the size of Western Europe. And Joseph Kabila, who's the president, very corrupt, he's been putting off when the election will be. It was supposed to be now. Now it's going to be next year, December 28, 2018. And the hostilities, the use of his military against people who are picketing, there's already 3.8 million people, that's a lot of people, who are internally displaced, and many more who are going across the border as refugees. The Catholic Church is playing a major central role in the DR Congo to try to get the election up and running and proper. They put together a very good agreement, which Kabila has then punted. Our ambassador, Nikki Haley, was just there. I met with her yesterday, and I had the hearing today. It's on C-SPAN if anybody wants to watch it on the replay. The loss of life, the rapes, the crimes against humanity are proliferating, and if we don't see a tourniquet on this real soon, it's only going to get worse. So, we're asking for sanctions against Kabila, personal sanctions against him and his henchmen. Under the Global Magnitsky Act, we have that capacity, and I think Trump and Nikki Haley just being there, they're very, very focused on this, because the loss of life could be even worse than it already is.
Congressman Chris Smith, thank you for being here. We will leave it there. The subject of race has been in the headlines more and more of late. Is there a growing racial divide in the country? And what can be done to bring people together? Bishop Edward Braxton has some ideas when the world over continues. Stay right there.
Sadly, and this is the truth, I personally know many African American laity, religious, and clergy, including bishops, who, based upon their own personal experiences, do not believe that their black lives matter in the Catholic Church as much as white lives matter. This is not a good situation. We must be bridge builders.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was my next guest speaking earlier this year on the subject of race in the U.S. and in the Catholic Church in the United States specifically. The division between races in this country seems to be widening. The white supremacist demonstrations in Charlottesville and the interaction between black men and police have come into renewed focus. My next guest is the Bishop of Belleville, Illinois, and he's spoken of the racial divide in the country. Here to share his thoughts on healing those divisions is Bishop Edward Braxton via satellite from Belleville. Your Excellency, thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be with you, Raymond. Thank you.
I want to start with the number of black Catholics here in the U.S., this, of course, being Black Catholic History Month. But the numbers, I was staggered to learn that there are 2.9 million U.S. black Catholics, now surpassing the population of the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. What do those numbers tell us? And do they indicate the strength of the black Catholic experience here in the U.S.?
Well, I hope the African American Catholic community has a true strength, but the fact that there are only 2.9 African American Catholics, you must remember, there are nearly 70 million Catholics in the United States. Mm-hmm. And while the 2.9 million African American Catholics is larger than the number of African Americans in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, keep in mind that for the total African American population of about 36 million Americans, about 5% or even lower are Catholics, and 60, 70, 80% are either mainline Protestants or traditional African American Christian churches. So while many Catholics don't know that there are 2.9 million African American Catholics because they don't live in Chicago, Baltimore, Washington, New York, St. Louis, New Orleans, Houston, and places where there are significant numbers, right, the number is still quite small. And I should say older people. They're not primarily 20-somethings and 30-somethings.
So where has the church fallen down on this issue, Your Excellency? Why has, because you said in your talk, the horizon of possibilities at Catholic U, you said, I do not believe there are any grounds for hoping the number of African American Catholics will increase significantly in the coming generations. Indeed, the number may actually decline. Why? What are we missing?
Well, I did say that in my address on the racial divide, and Old Wounds Reopened at Catholic University of America, because the Catholic Church is a part of history, and history cannot be undone. And unfortunately, in the United States, the Catholic Church could be said to have been on the wrong side of history during the terrible events of the so-called slave trade, the capturing and buying and selling of free human beings. And we all who know history know that the Catholic Church was not an eager actor in the work to abolish human slavery. The Catholic Church did not object when Roger Taney, the Catholic Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, ruled in 1857 that African people were property and had no status. It has taken the Catholic Church a long, long time to begin to actively and aggressively work on behalf of the true dignity of all human beings in terms of the race relations in the United States. And so the fact that the Catholic Church in the 1950s began to make statements about racial justice, and more in the 1960s, of course, it is hard to undo all those years from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, especially during the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to northern cities, when neighborhoods were segregated, schools were segregated, churches were segregated. Young men of color couldn't go to a Catholic seminary. Young women of color couldn't go to a convent and become religious sisters. And so the Catholic Church is rightly working very aggressively and has also made great strides in service in the African American community, in education, healthcare, and advocacy. But unfortunately, people have long memories, and many people are now very happy as Baptists or even as followers of Islam, and so the Catholic Church doesn't occur to them as a place to make a religious home.
So how does the church make inroads? I mean, surely 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, Your Excellency, they are not burdened with that history. They don't really know it all that well. And when I think of Black Catholics, I think of Mother Henriette DeLille, I think of the Sisters of the Holy Family, of a Black Order in New Orleans. You know, because as a child, I saw those examples around me. Where is the church missing an evangelical opportunity among the Black community?
I know the stories. I know the life of Henrietta DeLille and the great work of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, the Holy Family. But don't forget, all of those orders, for example, the Sisters of the Holy Family, that's a segregated order. It came about because they could not be in other orders. The 20-something and the 30-somethings are not aware of all of that history, but the 20-something and the 30-somethings in the Catholic Church of people of color, they are not as interested in religion any more than the people of European American background. In all of our churches of whatever race, you don't see that many of the 20-somethings or the 30-somethings because of the great secular culture. Charles Taylor, in his book called The Secular Age, stresses the fact that in a secular age, it's not likely that people of a more youthful population, especially the educated, are going to be strongly attracted to organized, structured, institutionalized religion.
Your Excellency, that is not the story in Africa, however. And I wonder if the vibrancy of faith that we're seeing there, and even in the immigration patterns, you know, I had Africans in my parish in Virginia, and they were some of the most fervent, expressive believers in that community. Might that be a way to attract African Americans to the faith? And what are we missing here?
I don't know, Raymond. I have traveled to Africa many times, to Nigeria, to Kenya, to Uganda, to South Africa, to Benin. I've traveled extensively all through Africa, have many friends who are bishops there. I ordain priests regularly in various dioceses in Africa. Dear Cardinal Renzi from the Holy See is a good friend of mine, as is Cardinal Turkson. So I've traveled to their home dioceses. But Africa is in a very different place in its history and culture. It's in a very different place. First of all, the people of, let's say, Nigeria, there's a large Islamic population, but also a large Catholic population. But the people of Nigeria are a young church. The Catholic Church is very young in the archdiocese, let's say, of Onitsha. And so the Catholic Church is a new, vibrant seed, and so there are lots and lots of vocations to the priesthood and the religious life, but the culture is much more uniform, and the culture in Nigeria or Uganda or Kenya is partially an agrarian culture, a culture that is very comfortable with a kind of an animist tradition, a sense of God in nature. It is not influenced by this secular technological culture where the questions that are often answered by religion can now be answered by technology and science. There's a sort of a kind of a natural religious spirit amongst many of the people of Africa, and also African people in Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, Benin, and other places, Ghana, have the culture itself is structured in a way that has a kinship with the Catholic Church. So I don't think you can easily say that the vibrancy of the church in Africa, even with the immigrants coming to this country, will mean that the African American community is going to grow significantly. I don't see the evidence for that. So I've read several articles saying that, but I don't see the evidence for that.
So you are not terribly optimistic about the future of the African American community in Catholicism. I mean, that's what I'm hearing here.
Well, no. Well, you're hearing me wrong. I'm very enthusiastic about the future of the church. I'm not enthusiastic about a significant and dramatic growth. But I would say I'm not enthusiastic about a significant dramatic growth of the Catholic Church in many communities. We see significant presence in the Hispanic community, the Vietnamese community, in those cultures that are not as dramatically influenced by the secularity and the technology of the American culture. I think the African American Catholic community, the small number of religious brothers and sisters and priests, and the small number of bishops and the small number of Catholic laity that we have, It is a vibrant community. I just spoke at the African American Congress in Orlando, Florida this summer, and I participated in many activities in the African American Catholic community. There's a vibrancy there, but you know, the church was not necessarily going to always be tens of millions of people. Jesus spoke of the salt, the leaven, the mustard seed. So the church can be vibrant and strong and effective and have a great impact without necessarily having huge numbers.
Okay. I want to talk for a moment before we run out of time, the issue of how to bring people together, how to overcome the racial divide and the racism we see in the community. There's been a lot of ink spilled over the last few years by bishops. You've written 2 pastoral letters dealing with race. I know my bishops in New Orleans have written of them. Recently, Cardinal Donald Wuerl issued his own pastoral letter entitled The Challenge of Racism Today. And the USCCB, the Bishops' Conference, now has formed an ad hoc committee to deal with racism in 2018. Your thoughts on what this might achieve and what should be contained in the forthcoming pastoral from the bishops?
Pastoral letters have no impact at all, Raymond, if nobody reads them, if nobody studies them, if nobody lives by what they contain. Brothers and Sisters to Us, published in 1979, which I helped Bishop Joe Francis and Cardinal Hickey, then Bishop Hickey, in the drafting, in the reviewing of that manuscript. Many Catholic parishes, you could print Brothers and Sisters to Us tomorrow, and 90% of the Catholics would think it was new, because it was never really studied carefully and implemented, preached from the pulpit, used in the schools, used in adult education, and it was never, many of the priorities and the challenges laid out there were never rigorously and aggressively followed up on. Have we done this? Have we done this? Have we addressed this? Have we addressed this?
I think you're right.
So the new pastoral letter will be important. I welcome it. I'm very aware of it. Any bishop who contributes something on the subject is very important. But if the people don't study it, think about it, break up into small groups and chew on it and personally appropriate it and bring it to them, to the liturgy, and pray before the Blessed Sacrament and ask the Holy Spirit to guide them, the racial divide in the United States will not become less acute, it will become more acute, which can be exacerbated in time by the vocabulary and the rhetoric of sometimes people in positions of leadership, which does not help the matter. The need to recognize the true meaning of the Incarnation. If we are Christians and we believe that the Word of God is made flesh in Jesus of Nazareth, and He redeems us all, He is the Redeemer of us all, then we see the dignity and the worth of every human being, of all religious and racial backgrounds, and we don't harbor biases and prejudices, even though in the United States there is a flaw at the foundation because of the horror, the original sin of this country, of the slave trade.
Bishop Braxton, I so agree with you. You know, one of the blessings of living in a place like New Orleans, and I didn't experience this in Virginia or New York where I've lived before. In New Orleans, blacks and whites eat together, we worship together, we go to parades together. There's an interaction, and that proximity makes racism a lot harder when you have to live and be around each other, because there ends up being no other anymore. You're all in it together. That is not the experience in the segregated North and other places I've lived.
No, the culture of New Orleans is unique, I would say, though I lived, as you may know, for several years in Lake Charles, which isn't far away. When I was the bishop of Lake Charles, I'm originally from Chicago, however, and Chicago has been and continues to be one of the most segregated cities in the country, unfortunately. And if you don't have real contact with people of different backgrounds, it's the same as if you don't know any Jewish people. If you don't know any Islamic people, you presume that all Muslims are terrorists because you have no knowledge firsthand of the tremendously gifted people in the Islamic community. So I don't think we can expect some quick fix. The key to me is bringing people together in various forms of conversations. Our American society is still very separated. Very few African American families and European American families sit down for dinner together, go on vacations together, travel together, pray together. Our churches are still largely segregated. Contact and genuine sharing with an openness to true conversion. True conversion.
Thank you very much. Great to hear you. Bishop Edward Braxton, I hope you'll join us again.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I'm happy to be with you.
That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links or at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. Devon Franklin joins us next week, and we'll have a sneak peek of the new movie, The Star. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.
Thank you.